Holy! It seems like there's just crisis after crisis after crisis in the world right now. Like we're plunging into a world that's on fire. Not literally. Well, maybe in Australia, that's literal. It seems like in this post-Pearl Harbor world, you just can't trust your neighbor anymore. Well, that might be true, because even though the world seems bad right now, it could definitely get a whole lot worse. The modern world is a fragile balancing act between billions of different people making things, sending it across the world, all while we have to smile and shake hands with our biggest enemies. It could all change though. There are not one, not two, not three, yes there are three major challenges that we need to face in the future. So let's just get into them. If you're a human, which assuming you're watching this video, you are, you live here. That's what we call Earth, or the globe. And it's a big place, so big that if you lived here, you would have absolutely no idea what was going on over in China or Africa or even down here in Alabama. But it all changed and we became a global species as soon as we realized that you can't grow everything in one spot. So people started trading, they started conquering, and they started sailing the ocean blue looking for spices, gold, slaves, rice, silks, you name it. If you can get it, we need to have it. We need it, we need it, we need it. There's the Silk Road, ocean trades, trans-Saharan trade, Incan trade routes, and Milk Road. But wait, this thing is expensive. If I'm a king over here in Europe and I want to get silk from China to impress my cousin wife, the silk has to go through all of these tiny kingdoms, and they realize they can make a little bit of money by jacking the price up a little bit. By the time it gets to me, it might be going through 10,000% markup rates. So, for most of history, only luxury goods were traded, and trade stayed within bubbles of closeness. Most of the time, only within the one country. So whenever empires conquered everybody around them, after the initial period of being pissed off that a quarter of your country died, there was a little golden age of trade where you could get food from non-local sources. It happened with the Romans, and the Mongols, and the British, and the Americans. Wait, what? The Americans never made an empire. Oh yes they did, and it's a main reason why everybody wants to speak English, eat burgers, listen to DaBaby, and dress like this. You see, after a usual period of instability in the world, the Germans got a little bit crazy and started gassing everybody. And then everybody got mad that the Germans were not committing genocide but invading Poland, so there was a world war. Long story short, Japan ended up blowing up America's boats, so they overcompensated a tiny bit by creating the largest navy in the history of humanity, and then nuked them too. This massive navy and being situated over here when most of the fighting was here and here meant that after the war, the Americans were pretty much the only standing naval power on Earth. And because it is so much cheaper to trade floating on water than it is to push your cargo on land, that meant the Americans controlled the trade of everyone. The Americans had a plan to take over. Call it Bretton Woods, call it the Marshall Plan, call it NATO, call it the Alliance. I don't care. They all pretty much did the same thing. The Americans would protect your trade as long as you promised A, not to be a commie, and B, please don't be communist. It was like how when the Romans took over this lake, everyone could go and trade fish or togers or something over it, except instead of being this lake, it's this lake. And instead of trading fish, it's trading everything since it eventually encompassed the whole globe. They did this to stick two fingers up to the Soviets who were excluded, and in the process the world got some sweet cheap deals out of it. It's a golden age in history. You could go on for 2 hours about how it helped humanity and created the modern world we live in. Thanks to it, almost everything you use and eat does not come from within your own country. This trading frenzy, most people with degrees and fancy forks like to call it globalization, but it could be in danger. Sure, there are wars which are disrupting food supplies and fertilizer supplies which disrupt workers in industry, which disrupt supplies, which disrupt workers, which disrupt... But there's also the issue of the Americans maybe not even wanting it anymore. Now, unlike some, I do think the Americans will protect a ton of trade in the future. Can you imagine them giving up that power and influence? But there will definitely be a reduction. A, the plan worked a little too well and their main enemy that was the selling point for joining the deal is now non-existent. 2, these buildings, yeah, they got blown up. And the disasters of wars that followed has turned many Americans off the idea of being the global police. And 3, Americans are electing presidents that say stuff like this.
we're going to build the wall. We have no choice.
Require that companies make more of their components in America.
They clearly want to work on themselves and break up from the international world. Just like when the Romans collapsed and the map turned into this, our trade will definitely hurt if the Americans stop protecting it in the global empire. The scariest part of global trade is the food trade, which also happens to be the most vulnerable, being perishable and all. Lack of trade and instability leads to food insecurity, which leads to fighting over food resources, which leads to more instability. Many third world nations depend on imports of food to survive. A less globalized America could mean some of the largest famines in history. Yikes. So next time you see this image, don't laugh at it, but cry that it might be over soon. If you're watching this video, you're using the internet, an invention made because humans all decided that they didn't like farming and moved to the city instead. What's a city? What? How do you not know what a city is? Basically, instead of everybody living here on a sprawling farm, everyone packed up and moved into a smoggy, crowded city. Very nice. Why did we all do this if the two landscapes look like this though? Keyword, opportunities. The city has more to do, work on, and consume. It's the center of trade and the center of production, where industrialization happened. You know industrialization, right? The thing that made the thing that you put the dead plant goo into and it makes steel and video games and Big Macs. And it turns out, it's really nice actually. Sure, it kinda goes against human biology and makes us commit massive wars and stuff, but come on. It's worth it for cheap food and planes and Pokemon. But there is a catch to stuffing everyone into a city. Turns out when you have less space and need less manual labor, you have less kids. I mean, on the farm, when you needed help, you didn't ask for resumes. You went into your bedroom and waited for 12 years. Also, a result from these steam engines running were better medicine, longer lives, and less kids dying in infancy. So even though people were starting to have less children when they got industrialized, population still exploded. If people live twice as long, there will be twice as many people in your country. Until there's not. Eventually, so many people will live in these cramped apartments that the birth rate will take a nosedive, below 2.1. 2 for the replacement of the parents, and the 0.1 just in case. Life really is beautiful, huh? But this isn't happening everywhere. No, it all depends on how fast the country got to work. The ones who really pioneered industrialization were the British and honestly the Americans too. Because they had no idea what they were doing, it took a long time for them to get done with it. Around 7 generations for the British and around 100 years for the sprawling Americans. But because they were the pioneers, the rest of the world could take a sneak peek and copy their homework a little bit, doing it faster, and then faster, and then faster, then zoom! The faster you go and the more urbanized a country is, the faster people will move to the cities and the faster they will age. Here's Italy's population throughout time. You see this bulge when they got home from the war and made amore, and then it got older and older and wait a second, still older. Where are the kids? This trend is found in every country that is industrialized and every country that will industrialize. Too many oldsters for not enough younglings. This is a huge problem. First of all, young people tend to keep the country moving by buying things like houses and cars and drip and useless pieces of paper. And middle-aged people tend to be so talented that they produce a lot of stuff and knowledge. But old people, they're retired. They're out of the system. Nada. Well, they can still keep their money in the economy, right? Invested a little after stacking coin their whole lives. No, they've usually lived through enough economic crashes to realize that their savings could be wiped out any year and invest in boring old people things like bonds and gold instead of cool young stocks like Meta and Luna Coin. So when you have a country full of younglings, you eat a lot. One of middle-agers exports a lot and one of elders does neither. And there are a scary amount of countries going into this problem. Pretty much all of Europe except France and the UK, Russia, Latin America, East Asia, Canada, Australia, and scariest and fastest of all, China. Nowhere in the world is there an economic system designed for a shrinking pie. We always have produced more. More jobs, more computers, more electricity, more investment, more money printed, more debt, more. A retiring population with no one to replace them means less. And that means constant inflation and constant recession at least. And lucky for us, the 2020s is when the baby boomers are retiring. Hooray! Whatever, at least the West will keep accepting immigrants until Asia figures out how to go headfirst into this crash. Right, guys? Oh. If you have been alive in the last 30 years, I'm sure you have heard a little bit about this. It's probably the reason you clicked on this video. I mean, the thumbnail was the Earth on fire. Seems like a climate crisis to me. As it turns out, this whole industrialization shtick is pretty bad for the environment. You know, cities looking like this, glaciers looking like this, turtles looking like this. Okay, maybe that one's not related. Why is the Earth heating up? This guy. Oh, he is small, but a small guy can do big things. More specifically, it was because of the human quest for energy. Energy really is the currency of the universe. It lets you move things, heat things up, grow plants, go vroom, and you need it for pretty much everything. The history of humanity can be seen as the history of energy, and economies are really just the process of turning energy into goods and services. There are many ways humans use to get energy. The sun, animals, water-moving wheels, wind, slaves, but nothing quite compares to sweet, sweet fossil fuels. They're so bad for us, but oh boy, do they hit the spot. While not everyone on Earth has the knowledge, money, and quite frankly the right geography to get their power from solar, wind, or hydro sources, everybody has fossil fuels, whether oil, gas, or the dirtiest and most common of all, good old coal. And while we may have built a massive power grid for most of the world, if you want to get anywhere off the grid, you need a portable source of energy. You might not live out in the country, but you know who does? Farmers. There is just no growing food, at least at the scale we're growing at, without fossil fuels. Whether it be for the tractors, or harvesters, or sprayers, or semi-trucks shipping off the farm, or fertilizers, or steel used to make all the equipment needed, they all need fossil fuels to be made or to operate. But what about organic carbon-free, huh? Have you ever been to an organic food store? I think the vegetables there are smaller than when you get out of a cold pool. Am I right, boys? And it doesn't include the resources needed to make the equipment, or the process of making it, or the transportation costs of carbon, especially globally. There really is no organic food out there. Well, we likely can actually go 100% organic and carbon-free on our food production. Two ways. One, we give up all the progress we made industrializing, and at least 80 to 90% of us go back to the farm, using natural energy sources like oxes for harvesting and poo for fertilizer. With this option, we would have to leave the city, deindustrialize, and go back to living on razor-thin food margins, with many of us dying of famine if any slight disruption happens to weather or political conditions. Or option 2, we just stop using carbon in our food production and just accept we'll produce less food. Duh! Okay, over half of our fertilizer comes from carbon-based sources, and human labor is a lot slower than tractor labor. Which 5 billion people do you want to let starve? In many ways, we traded food security for climate change. But of course, there are other essential things we use, like steel, ammonia, plastic, and cement, which make up 25% of all carbon emissions. And there are big boats and planes which transport everything where no big enough batteries exist to electrify them yet. But food is a lot harder to take away. It's why I don't think climate change has a political solution. Politicians can't just wave their magic wand and get rid of carbon emissions in our food supply chain. And when it comes down to it, nobody is willing to give up safe and secure food. Maybe there will be some sort of chemical or physical breakthrough one day, sucking it out of the air, or a battery revolution or something, but today is not that day, and we'll have to live with the effects of climate change for the foreseeable future. Most places will get hotter, some will be drier, some wetter, some way, way wetter, some on fire, some underwater, some with no water, some windier, some less windy, some greener, and some yellower. But whatever the change is, it all involves some change in how much water your place has. You know, the most important thing to survive and all, which also happens to be a cornerstone of food production. Yeah, that's not too good. You know, don't use carbon and we can't eat enough. Use too much carbon and we might not be able to eat enough. Yikes. Then of course there's the whole natural disaster and rising coastline thing, displacing up to billions of people, putting insane stress on the areas who aren't hit as hard and underdeveloped nations who don't have the resources to protect their population. Resource-based mass migrations and wars might be a new world we live in, but hey, it might just be the cost of modern living. Make sure to waste less food, protect your investments, and salute the Navy.